Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to be part of this event. Excuse me. And it's very humbling to be here amongst this range of people who've experienced some form of acquired brain injury, the carers, the support services, and success and progress are quite a challenge to address, so let's see how we go. You have to be of a certain age, probably, to remember me on radio and television. When Radio Scotland started in 1979, I was a newsreader. That's how old I am. I presented Scotland Today for Scottish television during the 6 years I worked with them. I went on to work for Channel 4, ITV, Nationwide, BBC, and then 23 years ago, my life changed fundamentally. Now, I have to say, I don't remember what happened at all, but I've gleaned from talking to people and reading police reports and hospital reports what happened. I've been to a lecture, it was the 27th of February 1999, I've been to a lecture in London in Piccadilly, and I was making my way home to Islington by taxi. It was a Friday night, the traffic was heavy, and so not far from home, we were caught in a tailback, and I didn't want to pay a taxi for the last half an hour home, so I paid him off. I got out to walk, and as I crossed the road, I was struck by a police van which was driving on the wrong side of the road, and I suffered what was described by the medical team who initially treated me as a very severe head injury. Two off-duty nurses who were passing apparently helped me, and a passing doctor who was also there, wasn't needed, so he redirected traffic. He spoke to his mother in Edinburgh on the phone the next morning and told her what he'd seen, and ended, but I think she'll die. And weeks later, that mother, his mother, met my mother, who lives in Edinburgh, at a social event. They didn't know each other, and told her about this because she learned from the press coverage of my injury who my mother was. Press coverage. People get knocked down or suffer an ABI every day. Because of my work in the public eye, I had my 15 minutes of fame, and I did not die. Was it bad? Well, yes, it was. My now husband, but then my partner of some 5 years, was working in Moscow, where he lived, when it happened, and a friend phoned him. So within 24 hours, he got himself back to London and to the intensive care unit in the first hospital I was in, which was University College Hospital. And he said he couldn't recognise me, he thought there'd been a mistake. He told me my head was swollen up like a big blue football. But he eventually recognised my hairline and my feet. And he was to spend the next 3 weeks with me in intensive care. And I knew nothing, I knew nothing about this. I was put into an artificial coma, I was intubated, I had a hole in my head, I was given makeshift surgery, I lost a lot of teeth, my finger was broken, and so on. I was a typical traumatic brain injury survivor, so far as I was comatose for a few days, and when I was brought back to consciousness, I had no self-awareness. I had acute post-traumatic amnesia for some months and extended post-traumatic amnesia, PTA, for a long time. I was moved to the second hospital, again in London, the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery in Queen's Square, where I had further analysis diagnosis. My occipital lobe had been damaged within my skull, and that had knocked out my right field vision in both eyes. I wore an eye patch, and I had extreme word-finding difficulty, aphasia, and life in this form went on. I spent 3 weeks in that hospital. There was talk of sending me for rehabilitation to Ely, where there's a specialist hospital, but Alan remembered that my GP is in Edinburgh, and that made me eligible for an Edinburgh hospital, which offered rehabilitation. The Ashley, which has already been mentioned, where I was resident for 3 weeks. And I underwent a rehabilitation program, including physiological, psychological, and occupational therapy. These are started at the London Hospital of the National, my condition began to stabilise. I did not bounce back. No one, as the people here who suffered a brain injury, will know, nobody bounces back from a brain injury. I inched forward to inhabit the new me. As I remember it 23 years ago, well, I know this organisation didn't exist 23 years ago, and as I remember it, certainly Alan remembers it, in a way, carers' views are more important because they have a much more acute memory and caring experience of brain injured people. But Alan said when he went, he was looking for something to read, he couldn't find anything on the bookshelves, and there weren't ongoing support services. So he thought up his own ways of helping me. So for instance, with aphasia, word finding difficulty, we did word games. We did Bobble and Scrabble and crosswords, and they helped to a degree. After about 14 months, 15 months, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and I was prescribed serotonin-based drugs and cognitive behavioural therapy. And one of those actually helped considerably. I said I lost my sense of smell. I had chronic fatigue for 2.5 years, so I tottered back to a little bit of radio work, but I sort of had to sleep in the afternoon. I didn't want to, I had to. And I put on a lot of weight. I put on 4 stone. And I suffered, I think, what are quite typical character changes. I've read that, for instance, sufferers can suffer sexual disinhibition. Well, I don't think that was my particular trait, but Anne-Marie's mentioned a book that I co-wrote with Alan and, crucially, our clinical neuropsychologist, who became a friend really because we saw for such a long time, Gail Robinson, and we wouldn't have written the book without her scientific input and authority, because that's what makes it really a useful book. Anyway, I'm just going to quote a little bit of it from Alan's contribution, because the ongoing service I had was Alan, so he wrote, whenever I became very horrible to live with. Whenever she vented her frustration on me, I tried always to remember that it was the injury speaking. There were moments of determined negativity when nothing I did or said was good enough. Everything had to be interpreted in the most negative light. There was an increasing resort to passive-aggressive defence. Oh, of course, you must be right, because I've had a brain injury. Why should anybody, least of all you, listen to anything I say? There's no way to answer that doesn't lend itself to more negative interpretation. I tried and didn't always succeed to avoid escalating, to avoid biting back. One day at home, after Sheena had said something barbed and unkind and unanswerable, I said, without planning it, I've got nothing left. I'm emptied out. There's nothing left in me to offer to make this better. I'm going out for a walk. I'll be back in 20 minutes, and when I come back, it's your turn to think of something to make this better. It had taken 18 months to understand that there would be no going back to normal. The normal we'd known had ended with a police van driving on the wrong side of the road at midnight on a North London street. Finally, I'd come to understand it and accept it. I've really had to think quite hard when planning this presentation to remember the details of my snail-like journey onto the real world. And in 5 years after the injury, I was involved in making a documentary, that's 2004, and interviewing a few people who treated me, who were somewhat nonplussed by my recovery thus far, if you want to use that word, and my verbal and cognitive abilities, plus 1 or 2 experts who I didn't know, not treated me, including the late Jonathan Miller, who is known for his opera and dramatic productions, was actually trained as a neurologist. So he understood the small print regarding the brain, and he knew that what I benefited from was not entirely due to therapy or drugs. What was it? Luck, is what he said, luck. And I was very lucky in many capacities. First of all, the physiological nature of the injury. Gail, the neuropsychologist, and Alan. And here's what I've learned. Am I the Sheena McDonald as I was before the injury? Well, no. But I am Sheena McDonald, and every case of brain injury is different, whether it's internally generated by a stroke or an aneurysm, or externally like me, but they have details in common. Chronic fatigue, aphasia, obsessive behaviour, depression, and symptoms common to some, but not others. Memory may not return, fluency and motor control may go, physiological changes may happen. What I've learned is that recovery takes much longer than you can imagine. A brain injury is not like a heart attack or a serious illness. Recovery is very incremental and very gradual, and Gail herself will say it can go on for a very long time. Many relationships and marriages actually end, and one learns to live with your new identity. Very early on in my recovery, I was determined to get back to radio and television, and in a small way I did, but in retrospect it was really far too early. I no longer define myself by the injury. I know the wider world does. I still meet people who I haven't seen for a while who say, oh, didn't you have an awful accident? I don't use the word accident to describe what happened, because I don't think people who drive on the wrong side of the road are doing it by accident. I use the word injury, which seems accurate and neutral. Anyway, I now accept that if I want an obituary, it will likely include reference to what happened in 1999. But I don't define myself by it. I go for weeks, months, longer, without talking about it or thinking about it, and I have for a while. And that just happened organically, naturally. I've got great friends. One of them left a message on my answer phone. Do you remember that? When the court case found the driver who knocked me down not guilty, he claimed he made eye contact with me on a rainy midnight street in London, which anyway. And my friend left a message saying, I'm sorry it didn't work out, but the only way is forward, so forward we go. And that became my mantra for a while, and it remains a guiding firefly. So now I no longer drive following my compromised right field vision. I still miss some of the right hand squares in a crossword. I can't smell hyacinths or lilies, although I can remember the smell of them. Although when my sister had a baby quite late in life, she's now 14, I was a very cheerful nappy changer because my sense of smell was completely changed. And I haven't been able to sing since the injury. I was interviewing a doctor for a program, and he told me that many people experience that after a trauma, a heart attack, or any kind of severe illness. And I said, why? He said, no one knows. And I am still carrying too much weight, but not 4 stone too much weight, so I'll get there. What I've learned, I think, is that everybody, no matter whether you've had an injury or not, everyone has to compromise as life progresses. And my compromises are rooted to where they are, but we all have to compromise. I'm alive, and that in itself is a small success. So the only way is forward. Forward we go. That looks like an advert for the book. I'm not trying to sell it. Although I will say that a couple of weeks ago I was at the opera and I found myself sitting beside a friend, and he had a friend with him who was And he was introduced to me and he said, oh, he said, did you write that book? I said, well, I co-wrote it. He said, it's very good. And I recommend it to people who come into the surgery suffering from a brain injury. So I looked it up on Amazon. And it cost £78. But that's the hardback copy. You can get it on Kindle for £15.
That's fabulous, thank you so much. Is there any questions for Sheena? Yes.
Just to say thank you so much for coming today. You're a fantastic ambassador for brain injury survivors. I'm a speech and language therapist, and I'm sorry to hear that services were so poor for the disturbance to your speech. But like you say, you had so many other encompassing difficulties. What I was interested in hearing from you, and just to say, I'm a fan because I remember you, I'm revealing my age here, and I always admired you on Newsline and the presentation. I did want to ask if you were able to describe a bit of a defining moment in your journey where you felt like a new life had begun and a turning point, perhaps. Is that difficult to capture?
It's very difficult, but fortunately my husband's here, so he might remember one.
So is Alan going to give us this answer?
Yeah. I can't. I mean, as I said, for me it was incremental.
Since you're a speech and language therapist, I'll tell you a story about the speech and language therapist who treated Sheena in the National Hospital.
Would you like to stand up, Alan?
Okay. I always do what I'm told. And Sheena wasn't allowed to eat because she couldn't swallow and it was too dangerous to eat. And so every day the speech and language therapist would come around and test her swallow and shake her head and say, no, not yet. And she was getting hungrier and hungrier and losing a lot of weight. And she didn't work on Fridays, so Thursdays were huge. Because if she didn't say yes on a Thursday, she didn't see Sheena again until Monday. So a Thursday came and she said no again. And then Monday came and she said, and each time the lunch trolley went round, Sheena's eyes would be on stalks following the world, watching other people being given their meal. And Monday came and she said, yes, let's try. Let's try some soft food. And so, and this was about 5 weeks after the injury. And Sheena still wasn't really making much sense in that she could speak, but what came out of her mouth didn't mean anything. And so eventually the trolley came round and the lady put a plate of horrible hospital food, beige, mushy food on a grey plate. And she said, this is the first time she's eaten for 5 weeks, so try to make sure she doesn't wolf this. And Sheena looked at the food and waited till she was out of earshot and said, she's bloody optimistic, she thinks I'm going to wolf this. And when you're a carer, you latch on. I recognise that as distinctively Sheena's humour and character and personality. And when you're a carer, you latch on to these small moments as evidence that there's going to be progress. So that's a little speech and language therapist anecdote.